Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be in this room. If you're sleepy, I'm screwed because I flew in from the West Coast last night, so hopefully this goes well. When the team reached out to me and asked me to be the keynote here, I wanted to do so for two reasons. First, because I believe that strategists are the underpinning of our entire industry, and I don't often get the opportunity to speak directly to strategists, so I was excited about that. And secondarily, when you get an email in your inbox and that says adapt or die, you open it because it feels like really quite a threat. So good news, alive. So that means that today we're going to talk about adaptation. As mentioned, I have been in this industry for 26 years. So this morning we're just going to take a little peruse through that journey. I think it's interesting when we look at what's going on right now, when we look at a company like NVIDIA being at the top, or gosh, Microsoft used to be like a little bit boring for a hot minute, and now it's back up at the top again with ChatGPT. A lot of people think that the biggest companies in the world will always be the biggest companies in the world. And frankly, that's not true. Over the past 200 years, there have been 17 companies that are the biggest company in the world. And I'm guessing that when they were that biggest company in the world, they thought, nothing can ever stop this, right? So you look at whatever, railroads, any of these kinds of things, and they're not. If you're not looking externally, then potentially you could be disrupted, not only by somebody in your own industry, but by brand new industries existing. So you can be at the top, or you can adapt. Sometimes people die, not people. All the time people die. 100% of people die. Sometimes companies die, but sometimes they also innovate their way into something newer, bigger, and different. And I've had the good fortune of being at a lot of these companies when those things have happened. Now, I've also been at companies when that has not happened. So we will talk through that today. We talked about that already, so let's move on. All right, anybody know what this is a picture of? Okay, I didn't either. Thanks, Justin, though. I got to look it up. It is the British East India Trading Company, which was the largest company, not only in British, Eastern, and India, but in the world, because they had government contracts that enabled them to be the conduit by which most things around the world were shipped. But they are also, sadly, or not so sadly, dead. These are the other industries that we've been talking about, and this is where the winners have been at each of their individual times. I think this is a really important point to land. Despite my saying it already, I want to re-emphasize that people, I think, in our industry in particular, look at the other tech companies or the other advertising agencies or the other publishers and think, gosh, how do I get bigger than that one? But when you think of oil to railroads, railroads to automobiles, automobiles to tech to now generative AI, we have to look everywhere for ways to disrupt and to learn. Otherwise, you could become irrelevant. All right, these are the places that I have worked in 26 years. I'm going to re-emphasize that because you just talked about this moment in time. It feels so big. It feels like, oh my goodness, with generative AI, so many things are going to change, and it will. But over that 26 years has been the invention of the internet itself, mostly, or at least as a business, not the actual invention, but turning it into a business when I started my career in 1999. The iPhone came out. There was a dot-com bust in 2000. Anybody lived through that journey? I feel super old. Somebody just raise your hand. Great, thanks. Yeah, that's awesome. 2008, the bust then happened as well. The iPhone came out. And so, yes, it can be terrifying. But all of these things have also made the industries in which we work leap forward, and that we are at that moment in time right now. So I'll go into each of those individually just to give you kind of the adapt or die lesson on each. And now I'm currently at Fanatics. We do about $8 billion a year in officially licensed merchandise. We own every team, league, sport that you can think of. We are very good for Christmas gifts, and Yeah, buy a jersey, thanks. But we also own Topps, the trading card company, which we are reinventing as an industry in real time. We own Lids, the stores. We have a betting and gaming book. So anyway, a litany of different things, which we'll get to at the end, because I think it's a really amazing example of a company that continues to innovate. Has anybody seen this quote before? Okay, I worked at Amazon for a long time. I never heard him say it, but let's attribute it to him anyway. I think it is. I don't really know if it's actually a Jeff Bezos quote, but it certainly seems like one. If you don't disrupt yourself, somebody will do that for you. And I don't just mean companies. I mean that as a person. We just looked at that slide that had all those logos on there. And if you look back at, say, my parents' generation, I would look like a job hopper. Right? That's too many companies in 26 years. It's actually not that many, and I was at Amazon for 7 and Yahoo for almost 7, and I've only been at Fanatics for like 10 minutes, so that one doesn't count just yet in terms of job hopping. But that changes too. I remember very specifically my dad saying, you have to stay at your job for at least 10 years, otherwise you'll look like a job hopper and nobody else will hire you. That is terrible advice. Typically, although he usually gives really good advice, so I'll let him slide on that one. But he wasn't wrong. Anybody here from Detroit? Somebody just maybe pretend? Great. Yay, okay. So I think one of the coolest things about going to Detroit and knowing people from Detroit is when you ask people where they work, they say Fords, plural, but it's actually possessive, because so many people in Dearborn have worked at Ford that their grandfather worked for Bill Ford. So they work at Ford's place. And I think that's awesome. And they stay there, and then they earn their pension. But when you actually look at the entirety of it, they've been in a litany of different divisions. They continue to innovate. So you can innovate within your own company as well. But you do have to disrupt yourself. All right. Back to Amazon. So let's just assume Jeff Bezos said, if you don't disrupt yourself, somebody will do it for you. If I were running the world's biggest bookstore, I probably wouldn't have invented the Kindle, because that's kind of bookstore killer. But I think it's amazing, and it's actually part of the reason I went to go work there. Not only am I a voracious reader, but I also think that kind of attitude within a company is extraordinary. In theory, we've all been in this place where somebody comes in and something's going to disrupt us, or, oh gosh, we can't do that, because then how are we'll kill this big, huge thing. Mind you, I got there when we were largely just selling media. So books, DVDs, CDs, all these kinds of things. And then you'd be done with one, and then you'd kind of wait like a week or two, and maybe you're hypothetically delayed at Newark for 12 hours, and then you get a new book. But with the Kindle and then the Kindle app on the phone, you can buy another book right away. Guess who that's good for? Amazon. And also humankind, because reading is good. And then secondly, people were more comfortable reading all different types of books because the cover wasn't outside facing. So pardon me if I'm a little racy here at 9:22 a.m., but do you think 50 Shades of Grey would have been the most popular book ever sold on Amazon if you had to read it on the train? No. So it allowed people this kind of permission to read all kinds of different genres and to genre hop. I have one thing that I think is particularly interesting about this, is that reading and books continue to be one of the only forms of media where people self-punish to say, I have to finish this book before I start the next one. Would you say that about, I have to watch this streaming series before I start the next one? I have to finish this playlist before I start the next one? No. So this is just me giving advice. I'd say read it all. Jump back and forth. It's fun. All right. This countdown clock's a little stressful. That guy. Oh, wait. There was a WWE fan in here earlier. Anyway, okay, so let's talk a little bit about Fanatics. We just launched Fanatics advertising about 8 weeks ago. Yay, team. Hi, this is my team. About 8 weeks ago. There was an iteration of advertising on Fanatics before we all arrived, but it was a little bit more like an extension of stadium advertising. So it was kind of just static placements, not a lot of traffic, not a lot of data. I started there as an advisor, largely to ascertain whether or not we have a role to play in the advertising space at all. And should we be a retail media network, or what should we be? And one of the things that we quickly discovered was that we have 110 million plus, with the plus doing a lot of heavy lifting, fan engagements all the time. And that's our customer data profile. We call it our fan graph. 110 million people telling us, I like this league, this team, this sport. And so we are building an advertising business on top of it. We are not a retail media network. There was a lot of innovation in retail media networks after Amazon and Walmart, but we don't have that big of a breadth of product in order to kind of do that closed loop attribution unless you're, say, Nike, Adidas, or New Era. So what we know is that sports are the center of culture. One of my team members said the other day, I thought it was really clever, is that the tunnel, when you run into a game, is the new runway. That is where people are getting so much of their fashion inspiration. So we're building on top of that and giving advertisers the opportunity to reach these fans in an area where they deeply, deeply care. All right. Now I'm going to feel 100. Who used Monster.com? Oh my gosh, yay, thank you. Okay, awesome. So I graduated from college in 1999. My husband would just stand here and tell you he graduated in 2000. And what was it like in my millennium? Which I dislike him for that, but like him for a lot of other reasons. And I was going to the Career Center. We all were. I went to UCLA undergrad. And you had to go to the Career Center and you'd get your resume reviewed, and then they'd give you permission to flip through binders where people had already taken out all of the good jobs. And I was like, there has to be a better way. I want to move to New York City, and here I am in Los Angeles, California. So do you know how I got job listings in New York City? My dad's friends overnighted me the New York Times. And I was like, this sucks. So started looking for jobs online, skipping the Career Center, and started using Monster.com, which was the largest job search engine, and it wasn't even close. I liked it so much and found it so efficient, and now it just feels so normal that you would look for a job online, obviously, that I emailed them. There wasn't a contact us link at the bottom. That was innovated later across the internet. And I got in touch with them and said, I really like what you're doing. Can I work there? So boldness in the back over here as well. I think that's awesome. That's how I got my first job, too. I just asked and then interviewed and, was so charming. But you can't just be first. I'll go back here. Monster.com declared bankruptcy 5 weeks ago, which is probably about 15 years after any of you thought that was true. And we all went back to Boston. We drank in the parking lot. It was awesome. But yeah, we were there. I was there very early. And they declared bankruptcy 5 weeks ago. Why? I will give you a very specific example with Monster, and then I won't do this as in depth with each of them, largely because I have 6 minutes remaining. But so Monster had these huge clients. Kelly Services was one of the clients, the biggest of the clients. And what it was in a job placement agency. So the jobs that they were posting weren't actually necessarily available. They were just apply so that they could have people's resumes in their database. And then there would be jobs. It wasn't like a fraud or anything like that. But people would get really frustrated because there wasn't an actual job at that actual moment. I remember sitting in rooms when we're like, oh man, this is not good for the customer. People are applying to jobs, not hearing back, et cetera. And there was, not a vote, but I'm going to call it a gentle argument about whether or not we should continue to work with Kelly Services or only let people that have active job postings post. We decided to stay with Kelly Services. We were a public company. They were a huge client. And then guess what happened? People started fleeing, going to Indeed, which actually didn't create one of these services at all. What it created was a scraper to go to each one of the different corporate websites, pull their active job listings, and aggregate them. And here we were, I'm not kidding, like jobs were coming in via fax machine and people were typing them into Telnet systems. So while we were focused on how do we hit the quarter, somebody else was focused on what is the new tech that's gonna put this out of business. Now, sometimes it's not always your fault. There was a lot of FCC regulation at that time. We tried to buy both Hot Jobs and Career Builder, and they blocked us, which is kind of interesting in today's current environment, isn't it? And then Variety. I worked at Variety for 2 years, on the nose, as to not disappoint my dad. I had wanted to move back to Los Angeles from Boston, because it's warmer, and I got married, and so I took this job at Variety to go over there and help them launch Variety.com, because I had already been working in this .com space, and I was a young whippersnapper, and I knew how to use the internets, so I went over there to help them build Variety.com. The challenge was, Variety, the paper, it was 100 years old when I got there. It was the Bible of the entertainment industry. We were doing $100 million a year in pages, but we knew we needed to have a website, so we built Variety.com. And then people inside the building said, well, we can't break stories online. It'll impact the integrity of our paper in the morning. And that was a decision that was very specifically made. And instead, our paper looked old in the morning. So this is the kind of the same through line, which is, that's the Kelly Services example of Variety.com. It was lovely. And then the other was that they put it behind a paywall, and the only people that were able to get behind the paywall were people who are also subscribed to the paper. So I left, and I think this is like an important thing, is that I just knew I wasn't making any ground. Like, this is an or die for me. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with Variety, but I kept saying things like, well, you can't put these certain words in your headline or it'll never index in search. Or there are people who may want to get this information that don't subscribe to the paper. Variety sold for $40 million total dollars. Again, we were doing $100 million a year in 2007. They are still around and lovely people. I'm going to go with everybody knows what this is, and if you don't, the door's over there. So I worked at Yahoo in 2007. We were the biggest website in the world, and it wasn't even close. We were number 1 through 3 in 32 different categories. There was dating, there was message apps, we bought Tumblr. It was massive. It never even crossed our minds that we could be disrupted. I think that's a really dangerous place to be too, when you're just like too comfortable. One too comfortable mistake that Yahoo made is this little search bar right here, back in the day, was powered by a company called Google. Yahoo search was the biggest search, MSN and AOL being the other two at the time. Yahoo let Google paid Yahoo to be the default for the search engine, and then customers started to realize, I can skip all this and just go to Google. So I don't need to tell you the end of that story, I don't think, but one of the things I do think is super cool about Yahoo is that they are not only still around, but they are thriving because they narrowed their focus. So they are news, sports, and finance, and that is where we were best anyway. I realize I just made a plug for somebody else, but that's okay. They're awesome. And I worked at Snapchat. I got a call from the office of Evan Spiegel, the founder and CEO of Snapchat, and he said, we're looking for a chief business officer. Your name's come up a bunch of times, and we just want to meet with you before moving forward with another candidate. When are you in Los Angeles? I was going back and forth between LA and New York, working for Amazon, and I said, I'm here today and tomorrow, and then not for another 3 weeks. And they said, can you come in today? I said yes, and then I freaked the F out because I was 40, and I'd never barfed a single rainbow, nary a rainbow. So I took an Uber deliberately to the interview so that I could learn how to use Snapchat in the back of the car. Has anyone tried to learn Snapchat in 5 minutes? Not awesome. But I was able to kind of adapt to that, thinking like, oh gosh, I'm going to sound really stupid here. But I went in and actually told him that. I told him that story, and I said I just tried to learn it, and that I couldn't learn it, and that's why he should hire me. Because if I'm 40 and I can't do it, you, young man, need some feedback, right? Like about how do we age up and all this kind of stuff. they have invented an extraordinary number of things. And I have like the deepest respect for Snapchat. It's the smallest, obviously, of the biggest, if that makes sense in any way. But they are the ones who invented AR. They are the ones who invented the stories format. And when I got there, it was really hard to get advertisers to send in vertical creative. They were like, I can't buy from you because I only have a horizontal 30. And I'm like, yeah, I need a vertical. Nobody would do it until Meta, Facebook, Mark, stole it, the idea of the stories format. And I have to say, like, we were pissed off. And then it was the best thing that ever happened to us, because guess what happened? Advertisers started making vertical, and then they started buying more Snapchat. So while things can be frustrating, and you kind of want the or die sometimes, the part where you just keep innovating, even if you're going to get ripped off, is still important. Because innovation never ends. I just showed Netflix. I feel like we've gone through a lot of my career. I was at Netflix. I was the first person in the door at Netflix advertising. I don't think I need to go into much more detail about how Netflix innovates, but very similarly, they disrupted themselves. So they disrupted an entire industry. And I do miss going to Blockbuster and picking out. I think Blockbuster went out of business because they printed too many receipts and they ran out of money from their paper supply. Nothing to do with Netflix. But obviously Netflix changed the entire industry. But they had the biggest DVD business in the world, and they went to streaming. Remember at first it was two different things, it was like Quickster and then the mail delivery service. And it's hard to believe now that Netflix is continuing to innovate. They are utilizing AI for a lot of different things, not actors, not writers, don't worry about that. But nonetheless, there's a reason that things like Money Heist are dubbed better and differently at Netflix than at a lot of different companies, because they are leaning all the way into things that actually make sense to use some of this stuff, is like dubbing. And then now Fanatics, where I'm very excited to continue to innovate alongside my fellow colleagues and hopefully all of you. Best sports fans in the world. Who's a sports fan? Okay, and I like that one. I should just end on that. I think one of the things that's so cool about sports right now, especially, is that it's a pretty polarizing world. Don't know if you've read anything, heard anything. Nonetheless, everybody is so polarized right now, but the one thing that everybody can agree on is that they love their team. And the one thing that everybody can agree on is that if you are from New York, you hate Boston. And those kinds of things make people not only incredibly passionate, but it also makes them want to spend money. So I'm very excited to build the business. We are tiny right now, and we're going to grow it much bigger. And I'm really excited to do it with all of you in the room. You have 2 minutes and 28 questions. Oh, no! That's a lot of questions. 2 minutes and 24 seconds, 4 questions. Although I was told you're going to answer all the questions. So that sounds great.
No.
Yes.
We have time for a question.
One question.
A question.
Okay.
Right. It seems that one of the themes you had was about not getting too comfortable. And clearly you've made some moves chasing the things that were important to you. How would you advise one of our strategy friends in the room about future-proofing their own careers and not getting too comfortable? What would you tell someone?
That is a great question. I think it is not getting too comfortable, but also seeing kind of like the skate to where the puck is going. Is that there are a lot of companies that have a ton of customers, Fanatics being one, Snapchat was another, that don't yet have the underpinnings of an advertising business. So it's not just advertising, but anything. My advice is, if something is already built, but not yet properly monetized, run that way. I left Amazon, which was the largest company in the world, for an app that is famous for pictures of a certain type. But there are very few of those, actually, all things on a relative basis. And a lot of people are like, are you crazy? Like, you are leaving the biggest company in the world, but I had stopped growing. And it wasn't that Amazon had stopped growing. Certainly they haven't even for 1 second yet. But I had kind of stopped growing there. It was a bigger remit, and I was like, there were 220 million daily active users logging into Snapchat 30 times a day for an average of 30 minutes when I walked in the door, and they were making $600 million. And so I was like, let's go. And so I think it's that. It's like, what is underutilized, and then when do you know that you aren't walking in the door and learning something new at least once a day?
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you.